Well, it's good evening. Welcome. Welcome to Mill Valley Zen International version. Um, Whether you're in the practice period or not in the practice period, welcome. It's nice to see you all. Notice the days are getting longer here, just getting dark. So we have been working with the Genjo Koan, Dogen's essay about the koan of everyday life. And last week we talked about this passage about time, the firewood being firewood and ash being ash. And tonight, the next piece of this essay is Dogen talking about what it means to be awake, or the word that he's using in the original essay is the word satori, which is often translated as enlightenment. This enlightenment word that gets thrown around a lot in the Zen world is the translation of this word satori. Shohaku Okamura in the book Realizing Genjo Koan translates it as awakening, as being awake. And maybe I'll just read this passage. And in some way, Dogen's writing is sometimes incredibly cryptic and difficult. Sometimes it's prescriptive, so prescriptive when he, like in this particular essay, where he says to study the way is to study the self, to study the self is to go beyond the self, kind of prescription. This particular piece, I don't exactly know how to characterize it. In some way, it's very poetic. I think it's particularly poetic part, but that might not at all been what Dogen was thinking, because there's also maybe a kind of precision to the way that he writes. But so this, I'll read these few sentences that make up this section. When a person attains realization, it is like the moon's reflection in water. Yeah, so here that word satori is being translated as realization. When a person attains realization, it is like the moon's reflection in water. The moon never becomes wet. The water is never disturbed. Although the moon is vast and great light, it is reflected in a drop of water. The whole moon and even the whole sky are reflected in a drop of dew on a blade of grass. Realization does not destroy the person, as the moon does not make a hole in the water. The person does not obstruct realization, as a drop of dew does not obstruct the moon in the sky. The depth is the same as the height. To investigate the significance of the length and brevity of time, we should consider whether the water is great or small and understand the size of the moon in the sky. So in some way, especially the line in here where he says, the whole moon and even the whole sky are reflected in a drop of dew on a blade of grass, I couldn't help but think about the famous beginning of a William Blake poem where he says, to see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand. And I think a lot of what, I guess this is just my own sense, my own interpretation, is that he is playing with this notion of space and time and self and selflessness. And a lot of these images of the moon and the water are, at that time, I think were very probably well known, well agreed upon, well understood ways of talking about the idea of self and relationship and the kind of the interdependence of our the sense of self, and that that there is no solid self. So these images of the moon reflecting on the water and the dewdrop in a blade of grass. But I think for me, stepping back, I think it's a really important, interesting question about, well, what do we think of this idea of being awake or being free or realization? And I was reflecting on how the first time I ever in my life ever even entertained such a question was when I was a freshman in college, and I came across Abraham Maslow's Toward a Psychology of Being, and where I was introduced to this concept of a self-actualization, is what Maslow I think was using, and for me as a I think I was 21 years old at the time. It made me it made me stop and realize how unself-actualized I was. That I had very little sense of myself at the time, and felt in a way I got some glimpse, I think, into just how asleep I was in my life, and to just how needy and grasping I was for something. I didn't even know, maybe for being wanting to be liked, wanting to be loved, wanting to be accepted, wanting to figure out what to do in terms of relationship, in terms of work, in terms of money, that all of these things were completely confusing. And here was Maslow presenting this possibility of waking up, this possibility of finding freedom through self-awareness and through self-letting go, which he was using this expression, self-actualization. So again, like in this piece of writing, Dogen uses the word realization. Realization. What does it mean? What does it mean to be a realized human being? And in some way, so much of Zen teaching and practice, so the core, there's these 6 teachings called the perfections, right? So perfection is maybe another close relative of the word, self-actualization or realization, and the perfection of generosity, the perfection of ethical conduct, of patience, of energy, of meditation, and of wisdom. These are the kind of 6 perfection practices that are kind of core, I think, ways of describing what does it mean to be a realized human being. And so much of these perfections and these practices are in relationship, right? So we the practice of generosity. Of course, we can be generous with ourselves, and I think that is an important part of generosity. And this practice of ethical conduct is and generosity, though, is very much how we show up in the world. And also, one of the unique things about Dogen Zen and the Zen that we they think of as the bodhisattva practice of Zen, that this realization, this practice of realization or awakening or enlightenment, is so that we can be of service, right? There was a period in Buddhist practice when there was this emphasis about enlightenment, as though you would then kind of leave the world of birth and death, leave the cycle of birth and death. But Zen very much emphasizes both the sense of kind of radical selflessness and radical freedom, but for the purpose of helping others and for helping to free others. I was also thinking of this, one of my favorite lines from a David Whyte poem, where he says, "You must learn one thing. The world was made to be free in. You must learn one thing. The world was made to be free in." Again, this sense, this teaching about freedom and awakening. So I think I want to stop there and open up, get you talking about some of these questions about freedom and awakening and enlightenment in how you think about it and how it shows up in your own life.